Hello and welcome to this episode of Sunflower Sutras. I'm your host, Tara. To kick things off for this episode, I would like to read to you The Heart of the Tree by Henry Collier Bunner. What does he plant who plants a tree? He plants a friend of sun and sky. He plants the flag of breezes free, the shaft of beauty towering high. He plants a home to heaven anigh, for song and mother crone of bird, in hushed and happy twilight heard, the treble of heaven's harmony. These things he plants who plants a tree. What does he plant who plants a tree? He plants cool shade and tender rain, and seed and bud of days to be, and years that fade and flush again. He plants the glory of the plain. He plants the forest's heritage, the harvest of a coming age, the joy that unborn eyes shall see. These things he plants who plants a tree. What does he plant who plants a tree? He plants in sap and leaf and wood, in love of home and loyalty, the far-cast thought of civic good, his blessings on the neighborhood, who in the hollow of his hand holds all the growth of all our land. A nation's growth from sea to sea stirs in his heart who plants a tree. What does one do when they can't think of a topic for an episode? One might consider that they have writer's block, and one might get very depressed and wonder what they could ever talk about in the future ever again. Some, such as myself, might cheap out and project their problems onto someone else, like I'm doing today. In all honesty and in all seriousness, our last episode we discussed bad writing, and honestly what we were really tackling was humorous bad writing. We weren't actually talking about the thing that writers are actually scared of the most, which is not writing or not having ideas. Because as bad as those examples were in our bad writing episode last time, they're entertaining. You can't deny that. So today, I am going to be a little more personable and candid, and we're going to bring Ryan back to...
Hello.
Yes. He's right here. There's no illusions. He's just right here this whole time. But yeah, we're gonna talk a little more intimate. Because last time was fun and games. This time we're going to be more serious. Because this is a nightmare. Not the meta fourth wall thing of like not coming up with an idea for the episode. We have plenty of ideas. But overall in general, what do you do when you're out of ideas? Or your ideas just aren't coming out in a good manner and you're in that existential crisis that is known as writer's block. Which to me it never really feels like a writer's block. It feels more like being in a writer's sludge. Because I just really feel slowed down and mucked.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
I've never felt like I was stopped. I never felt like there was a blankness. I just felt more like there was muddled, garbled pieces of sewage and garbage disposal junk blocking my coherent thought.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I've never really experienced the whole not having ideas thing. I always have ideas. It's usually just difficulty getting them out, putting them down. When I try to organize my mess of a brain, it usually doesn't turn out great.
See, that's the thing. Most writers are people who readily use their local mental health services, so you can't just, like, excuse it as, like, some kind of mental fog thing. I mean, I have mental issues that can cause a detachment from my productivity. You have the same. Most of our friends have the same. So it's like, we can't just blame it on like, oh, my anxiety. It's like, your writing also helps your anxiety as much as it creates your anxiety. So
Well, I mean, depending on who you are.
Yeah, depending on who you are.
I don't want to speak too generally on that regard.
No. But I feel like as a person who uses Zoloft, I can at least shed some anti-stigma there. It's helped me through depression, and it's caused depression, this whole writing thing. I honestly have never experienced a writer's block as bad as I've had recently. For those of you who don't know me personally, earlier this year, I lost my mother. And ever since then, it's been very difficult for me to just make one thing in a certain amount of settings like I used to be. I used to be able to just write something out in 1 or 2 settings, and I used to be very productive. And lately I haven't. I've written a lot, and I've got multiple little journals, but I haven't really created a single, again, coherent piece. And I've also had that existential crisis of, and I think this is a very unique situation specifically for poetry and poets. Am I even writing poetry anymore? Is this poetic? What constitutes poetry and all of that existential stickiness?
I have an answer to that, but I don't think it's actually going to be that helpful to people. My solution is to just not think about it at all.
Oh, that's exactly what I've had to do. That's exactly what I've had to do. I've had to just keep pushing through, and then...
Just don't think about it.
Just don't think about it. Yeah, just don't think about it. It sounds horrible, but it's true. Like, I've had way happier experiences in the past few months just writing things down and having a kind of go with the flow attitude with what I've been writing down than trying to force a piece. I've been thinking a lot lately about, we had a friend of ours was talking about forcing yourself to write or forcing yourself to get in the passion to write. She put it way more eloquently than that, but something about the whole, you can't impose yourself if you're not in the moment. You can't force yourself to get into the moment. And then I've been thinking, like, do you have to be impassioned to write? No. Or does writing bring the passion to you? It's a thing I've been, like, thinking over a lot.
Yeah, you can't just make the passion happen, but it's also way too fickle to rely on to come naturally. And so, yeah, sometimes you just gotta force yourself to write. Sometimes, if you push past that initial bit, it'll come to you and you'll start doing stuff. And sometimes you'll push and you'll keep writing and it's just trash and you're having to think about every word and it's just not coming out. And that's fine, but just waiting for inspiration, you're never gonna get anything done.
Yeah. This is reminding me of a lecture that I sat in on when the poet Alison Blevins, who's been on this program before, she came to Washburn University to do a guest lecture for a class for Dennis Etzel, who's also been on this program. And when it got to the Q&A portion, someone had done the run-of-the-mill question you ask someone when, they've been published. Oh, what writing advice would you recommend to me as a student? And I loved her response because she was as, oh my god, I don't know, as I am right now. She was very blunt in talking about how you have to fail.
Oh, yeah.
And how it was very hilarious. She was talking about this one poem that meant so much to her emotionally, like the amount of catharsis and the depth of just sensitivity that this piece had that ended up being very harsh and not, well, to put it kindly, I guess, the opposite of a crowd pleaser. Like, it was very much a downer piece. And she loved it. But she told the class how every time she would perform it, people really didn't like it, and she kept trying this piece, and eventually she just had to retire it because it just wasn't working. As much as the feelings that were put into it were true and intimate, they just weren't going to work as a poem. It sounds so simple, but sitting there and listening to that, it was a very good lesson to take in.
Yeah.
Because the last thing I would want to do is force a piece and just try to push a square peg into a round hole as far as, like, a piece that I really love and have been working on for a long time.
You will, and I speak from experience on this, you will cripple yourself trying to do justice to the idea in your head, to an idea that you're very attached to. And if it's really too close to you, maybe just put it away and let it be this really beautiful idea. But if you're insistent on getting it out there and making something out of it, you just have to do it, and you have to somehow, and I don't necessarily know how to do this, but you gotta find some kind of way to stop worrying about it being bad and to just let it be bad.
How I learned to stop worrying and to start loving the bad. I had one piece in particular that when she mentioned all of this advice, I was thinking about, and it's a piece I've been writing for years now, and I'm still writing it. It's not even that long of a piece, which is kind of the embarrassing part about it, but it's a piece that's similar to her experience in the past when I performed it. People just kind of had a very cold, like, okay, reaction to it, and I find myself taking away a lot and adding a lot, and it's in a totally different direction than when it first started out. I also find that a lot of pieces that I've had bad experiences with, either from sharing them with other people, performing them, or just never being able to finish them. Because there's plenty of little tiny things I've written over the years that I never turn into a full-fledged work. And I don't know if anyone else does this. I'm pretty sure there has to be other people that do this. I will sometimes just Frankenstein these pieces and just see what I could sew together.
Oh, yeah. I do that with fiction all the time.
Oh, you do that with fiction?
Oh, yeah. No, I'll totally come up with completely unrelated ideas and then just find ways for them to be related. Oftentimes you come up with a way better story, way more fleshed out.
I wonder if that just works better for prose.
Maybe.
See, Ryan's coming from this prose writing world. I mean, you write wonderful poetry too, but
thank you. You
can also write really entertaining and good prose. And I can't say if I can. I know I should be more respectful of myself and my work and kinder to myself. A lot of people need to be much kinder to themselves because in the end we are our worst critics. And I know I should actually finish a piece before I decide to just like, oh, this is trash, I'm deleting this. But sometimes that's very difficult.
Yeah.
I've had a really weird problem where I haven't submitted anything in a very long time. I haven't submitted a piece since about a month before my mother died. And I don't exactly actually have the drive to submit anything. There's been several things where like, oh, the submission deadline for this is coming up. You should try to pump something out for it. And I don't know, whereas I used to jump through hoops at the prospects of submissions and publication, it's not really been a thing I've been worried about recently. It's more been a thing of like, oh, if I feel like it, I'll get around to it. It's not even been a situation of, I don't think I have good material for this. Because I have plenty of backlog material to just be like, oh, this would be a good submission for that. But I don't know if this is a part of this haze I'm going through or not. But then I know people that never submit work and are absolutely happy and productive with their writing.
Sure.
And then I know people that have to submit or they don't feel like they're a writer anymore.
Right.
That's another thing I'm terrified. I'm the psychological crisis of identity in writership. I feel like especially, not even, but especially if your friends are writers. There's this pressure to constantly be doing something writing-wise.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm over imposter syndrome, because I don't think anyone actually gets over imposter syndrome. But something that has definitely helped me in that regard, and I've been very fortunate, is at college, I had writing professors that took their students seriously, even when it may have been kind of silly to take us seriously.
Writing is silly.
Sure, but
give me money for the things I thought of.
But having people who basically are professional writers, their job is to do writing stuff, having people in that position treat you like a writer, I think definitely helps. I don't know if I'm going anywhere with that, though.
I think you are... See, this is another thing. Ryan and I come from two separate worlds. In college, I studied history, and in college, you did English. So you've been a writer this whole time, and you've been a part of writer communities with writer mentors and writer peers, and I've been on the fringe, and I was not a part of the English program at Washburn. I wasn't in that clique. I didn't do things for the same classes that you had. You had a constant reinforcement to create the identity that you have now. Do you feel like it actually helps you? Do you ever question yourself? Like, post-grad?
Well, I mean, who doesn't question themselves? Like...
I don't mean in the larger sense. Of course, in the larger sense, you're questioning yourself. I mean, in that one sense of that neat little packaged bow, I'm a writer.
Well, like I said, you never really get over imposter syndrome. Like, yeah, I mean, obviously I worry about if I'm a real writer or if I'm good enough to be a real writer. It's not that I don't have those concerns, it's just having that community, having that reinforcement has taught me, or at least helped me, to live with it.
What, does everyone else have the same thing going on with themselves?
I would imagine. Judging just by the way people talk, yeah, it really sounds like it. Almost everyone I know is like, oh, I'm not really good. Oh, I don't know if I'm a real writer. Oh, I don't have ideas, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, it really seems like everyone feels that way, as far as I can tell.
I've always been concerned if that was... Because a lot of our friends obviously overlap. If that was more of a, am I good? Versus the general, am I still da-da-da.
Like a writer?
Yes.
I mean, is there a significant difference?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm concerned necessarily with being a good poet, but I do know there are times where I don't feel like much of a writer. Especially going into other creative projects. Do you ever feel like your identity as a writer is ever weaker or compromised when you delve into something else more?
No. I haven't really experienced that, actually.
And this is the part of the show where Tara discovers that self-esteem issues are a thing.
Well, I don't really think that's necessarily related to self-esteem.
I guess if I'm not constantly doing something in some degree of the project, or whatever else it is, I start to wonder, and I start to feel less of it. It's kind of like that cliche of going out in public to write so people could see that you're writing so they know you're a writer.
Oh.
I don't do that, but I do like to write in public just because I like to get out of the house.
Yeah.
On one hand, there's that fear, but then on the other hand, there's that actual practical, like, I don't care if everyone in the world knows I'm a writer.
There's also a bit of motivation there when you go and write publicly. Because you don't want to be just the weirdo in the back, just sitting there, not doing anything, just staring down at your notebook.
Oh, you don't want to be that. Oh.
So it's motivation to actually write.
Ooh.
It's like, oh, people might see me. I should probably be productive.
Big oof. Here's the thing. When I think I inherited this from my mother. When I think, I space out, like, physically. So it looks like I'm just staring off and doing nothing. I'm thinking. And my brain's probably going about 1,000 miles per hour. But it looks like I'm brain dead. The secret is, I'm brain dead.
No.
What are things... First of all, have you ever had a major funk in the past?
Oh, all the time.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if I've ever gotten out of the first one.
Okay. Okay, this is like putting on pounds after getting pregnant. It's just like, you just keep that forever. Okay. Well, then with that spin, what do you do to combat it?
I wish I knew. I could probably get out of it a lot easier then.
What makes you feel better or helps you get productive?
Honestly, something that helped a lot. Because I've heard people say that they I could never get a creative writing degree. I could never study it. It'd make it work, or it'd lose the magic, or something like that. No. I was at my most productive, and I wrote my best work when I had the gun to my head known as finals. No, deadlines and constantly, 3 or more days out of the week, being surrounded by other writers and other people trying to write, that's what made me productive. That's what gave me the energy to keep going, was being around other writers all the time and having deadlines. And obviously that is a lot harder to get outside of college, which is, I think, why my productivity has drastically fallen down since I graduated.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Ryan, myself, and my husband will go on these little writer dates where we'll just go to a coffee shop or something and then set up shop and just write for a few hours. Are those your most productive writing sessions?
Usually.
Oh boy. So I wish I could say the same, because I always end up just drawing.
Yeah, that's cool too.
But it's not writing.
You're good at drawing and you're still being creative.
I guess I can feel good about that, but I'd really like to write.
Sure.
I think for me, I have such a huge problem of deconstructing and then reconstructing concepts and ideas that like I said, I got into this horrible mindfuck existential crisis of what even constitutes a poem. And it wasn't until very recently when I picked up a Leonard Cohen book, of all things, that I finally got out of that horrible existential funk about what even constitutes poetry. Because obviously reading other people's work, I can discern, this is gorgeous. I love the way that this plays with words. I love the puns. I love the imagery. I love the minimalism, the macro spectrum of storytelling, whatever it is for whoever's poem I'm reading. I can subconsciously figure out what I like about it, but then turning the lens on myself, I'm just completely at a loss. There was one poem in particular, with this one passage in particular, of Leonard's poem, Prayer for Messiah. His life in my mouth is less than a man, his death on my breast is harder than stone, his eyes through my eyes shine brighter than love, oh send out the raven ahead of a dove. And then the next passage it's very sing-songy, which obviously Leonard Cohen did a lot of poems that were very sing-songy. Several of the poems, in fact, are titled Song of, or Ballad of, or, Obviously, you love Cohen.
Did you know that Leonard Cohen wrote songs?
Did you know?
He's actually a novelist before any of that. Not a lot of people know that.
This book in particular that I picked up of his, All of Our Mythologies, or something similar to that title, was published in the mid to late 60s, so this was one of his really early books.
Okay. Yeah, his first record, The Songs of Leonard Cohen, came out in the 60s, I believe.
In the 60s?
No, he actually got into music surprisingly late in his life, given how much of his career ended up being music.
Yeah. And of course, as many books as he had under his belt, that's what most of the world will recognize him and remember him for, is his music.
Yeah.
Which is the funny thing that I'm getting at with this passage. The passage that follows, Oh, send out the raven ahead of the dove. Oh, sing from your chains where you're chained in a cave. Your eyes through my eyes shine brighter than love. Your blood in my ballad collapses the grave. And it just, the line scheme he has, this repetitive nature of the words, it's so reminiscent and perfect to translate to a song. And yet, I still see it more as poem than lyrics. And something about reading this poem, Prayer for Messiah, just clicked that dusty light bulb in my brain. Just clicked it on, and I just suddenly had this epiphany light of, I've always loved the musicality. I've written lyrics in the past, I've had music projects in the past, but I think every writer has certain aspects of writing that attract them more. And mine has always been like the musicality of words, without making them into songs, because then you're just writing songs. I certainly know plenty of writers, friends of mine, who are entertainers first and foremost, activists first and foremost, performative artists first and foremost, but I think for me, especially after reading this, I just realized what I like in my writing is when there is a certain kind of sing-songy tone that divides it from just weird prose to poetry. And then, of course, weird prose is poetry, and then it just unlocked all the good feelings.
I'm gonna be honest, I will never understand why people separate lyrics and poetry.
They're both poetry, but...
It's all poetry. It's the same thing.
There's a difference between writing poetry that's supposed to be just poetry versus poetry that's supposed to be performative poetry versus poetry that's supposed to be accompanied by musical instruments versus songs. Like, there's that 4 separate aspects, you know?
It's... Who cares?
I cares! No, so that's the fun thing about art. Some of it is totally, like, music first and foremost. If I wanted to do that, then I'd actually learn to play guitar and be you. But that's the fun. That's the spectrum of writing. And that's, I think, part of what I've been forgetting this entire time, is just the sliding scale between it. And I can write weird, stupid, prosy things and narratives and stories and all that junk, but as long as I like how pretty it sounds, that's all that matters. And then I felt better.
That's good. I suppose maybe part of the reason why I don't worry so much about if I'm a writer or not is maybe due to the fact that I'm more concerned with just being an artist in general, and like getting all hung up on, oh, am I a writer, or am I a musician, or am I a songwriter, or am I a novelist, or am I a podcaster, do I draw? If I'm making art, what difference does it make?
It doesn't make any difference when you're dead, but when you're alive... You want one thing to be the thing people know you for, so they'll call you up and be like, hey, do you want a da-da-da for our da-da-da? At least in my thinking for myself. I haven't had a single person call me up and be like, hey, can you draw this thing for our project? But I have had people call me up and be like, hey, can you perform poetry for our thing?
Yeah, but like, would you have a problem with it if someone called you up and was like, hey, I really like your drawings?
Well, that's the thing, is not so much.
Well, yeah, you would have a problem with it because someone admitted to liking your drawings.
I would have, yes, you are 100% accurate. You are roasting me, and it's true. The tea is hot. What I'm saying is that I've already been pre-established in my community with my network of friends and in the scene as a writer. And it's almost what it felt like and continues to feel like for me when I have difficulties is a very much internal keeping up with the Joneses. Yeah. Is it real? No. But is it damaging? Incredibly.
Yeah.
But then there's people like you who are way more free and less constrained, and you just want to be a general artist. For our listeners at home, the guy who's way less concerned is the one that's more productive, so keep that in mind.
I suppose.
I mean, you could be a head case who at least relaxes occasionally and actually writes, or you could be a head case who just gets neurotic, introspective, and starts thinking about the, like, metaphysics of what constitutes words, and not write. And I think you'd prefer the first one.
Yeah.
I have to ask, and I have to put you on the spotlight for this, because you actually went to college for writing, and you actually were mentored by actual writers. What's the best advice you've heard?
That is a good question.
If it helps, I'll share mine. And of course, I wasn't in any writing classes. I wasn't an English major like you were. But the best bit of writing advice I got in general: avoid passive voice as much as possible.
I mean, sure.
I mean, especially in academic
well,
writing.
Okay, in academic writing, absolutely.
But when you are avoiding it like the plague in academic writing, you are far more aware of it in your own writing. And I think that the way you phrase things and how you're, like, what tense and what possession you're doing of the things you're writing changes it ultimately.
Yes.
I feel like I'm a stronger writer after banging my head against a wall.
It's more about being, like, aware of voice.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. That advice made me way more aware of my own voice in my writing.
Yeah, it's really hard for me to really try to boil down my education into, like, pithy advice. Because it's a lot of small things. Let me finish. Because it's a lot of small things, and there's a lot of experience, and there's a lot of long discussions that really would require a lot of explanation, and I can't really, that can't really be, I don't know, dumbed down, I guess, is the word I'm looking for. I don't know. I guess something I can say, though, is Professor McHenry once said that the rules of writing are like jazz scales. You learn them so that you know when and why you're breaking them.
That's cute. I like that.
Yeah, that's probably the best advice I got that could be condensed easily.
A nice, simple, cute little anecdotal nugget.
Also, I don't know if this is really, like, advice that I got from, like, a professor specifically. Just something that I learned in general, and just kind of thinking about writing and specifically, like, workshopping and feedback and stuff, is it's okay to solicit people for advice and then not take it. And you don't have to argue with people that you're not going to take their advice anyway.
Oh, man. I have so much respect for people that have actually gone through workshops, because as a deeply introverted, shy person who doesn't know how to talk to people, that sounds like such a monumental effort. But also so fun, but also so scary. Yeah.
And also, like, giving feedback. Ultimately, I think something that's important to understand is that you can only criticize their story based on what you think they're trying to do, and they may be trying to do something else, and if they don't take your advice, it's not because, like, they don't respect your opinion or whatever. It's just because they're probably trying to do something different.
That sounds pretty fair. Would you say that ultimately the key to being a good writer and just writing in general is, God forbid, but communicating with people?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot. I wouldn't say this about a lot of things, but I could probably give, like, a whole presentation on feedback and criticism and things like that. I actually have a lot of opinions on that I don't hear very often from people. Or I just don't really hear people talk about it a whole lot.
You know what I smell?
What?
I smell a future episode topic.
Quite possibly.
Quite definitely, because I'm curious.
I would definitely need time to actually organize my thoughts on it.
Well, of course. That's the scariest thing, just sharing your work. But honestly, that's been a very helpful thing for me, as antisocial and terrified of a person as I am. And I've never been in a workshop before, and I've still, at the very least, reached out to people and asked, what do you think of this piece?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
oh, definitely. I share stuff with people all the time.
And from doing that, I definitely agree with what you said. It takes a lot of respect and patience to do that.
I mean, if you find the right people, it's definitely worth it, though.
Yeah. We just need to be kind to each other.
Yeah.
And on the note of being kind to each other, I am happy to now read the listener submission for this episode, so kindly brought to us by David Hopler. David has done a little bit of everything. Taxi driver, fisherman, dishwasher, bus driver, soldier, house painter, bike mechanic, bike courier, and teacher. He has published a number of stories and poems, including one collection of poetry, 64 questions. His poems have appeared in numerous literary journals and anthologies, and he has recently won several poetry competitions in spite of his contention that he never wins anything. He teaches English at College of the Redwoods and lives in Eureka, California, far enough from the madness of civilization that he can still see the stars at night and hear the Canada geese calling. Boceto. Looking around, you'll sometimes notice a red-haired woman sitting by herself, gazing out a window, or a sad-faced yellow man sitting on the edge of a cliff, staring out to sea. We need these seemingly empty moments to consider our place, our path in the wider world, before our hurry and scurrying is no more. Boceto, Japanese, verb. It's nice to know that the Japanese think enough to act of gazing vacantly into the distance without thinking to give it a name. Culacino. See it. It is the mark to show you have been here, this little dark circle of wetness on the glass tabletop on this blazing day just off the Champs-Élysées when the glasses sweated, and, silly fool, you left it to find somewhere cooler. Culacino, Italian, noun. The stain left on a table from a cold glass of water. Dépaysement. After the plane lands, or the ship docks, or the train has carried you over a border in the dead of night, you may find yourself waking early, strolling along a strange avenue, noticing how the light settles differently here than the angle you never noticed at home. Or perhaps the coffee tastes like memory, or just maybe when the sycamore leaves fall, they drift earthwards, as if the earth called them by their true name. Dépaysement, French, noun. The feeling one gets of not being in one's own country, of being a foreigner. Gattara. You know the story. In the news they are reporting when the old lady died, they found 100 cats in her house, all well fed, strays, everyone, living in the lap of luxury. Don't be jealous if in her will she left her millions to the mangy lot of them. Perhaps you were a stray once too, and understand what it is to be picked by the scruff and saved. Gattara, Italian, noun. An elderly woman who cares for stray cats. And lastly, petrichor. When the wind blows the sky in, all gray and wet and wrapped with rain, when the lightning spices the air with ozone, the earth reaches upward with its long, dry fingers and offers such a sweet, pleasant smell, as if to say, "Welcome home, my sweet." Tears of joy, welcome home. Petrichor, English, noun. The pleasant, earthy smell after rain. Thank you very much for those poems, David. That was quite the nice little lesson. Thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed the show, you can support us by liking us on Facebook or donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/sunflowersutras. We'd like to give a special thanks to our patrons, Poet Jen Harris, E. Campson, and Heather Aranda, for helping us keep this show running. If you or someone you know has some poetry that they would like to submit to the show, feel free to submit to us either via our Facebook or you can submit the pieces directly to me at tara.bartley@yahoo.com. So long gefol, and farewell.